Back out on the Riley. Just a little bit of progress tonight. I've TIG brazed nuts to the little metal dome that goes under the differential and welded those in place and have fitted that. That seems to fit okay. It helps stiffen up the under the tail floor there quite nicely, and because it fits in from inside the car, even if the screws all come loose, I'm not going to lose that piece. My brazing isn't the neatest, unfortunately, especially the first one when I forgot to turn the gas on. So I might just smear a little bit of epoxy around those just to clean them up. They look a little bit blobby, but there's no danger of the nuts coming loose. And I'll give that a coat of paint when that's all dry, so there's no corrosion between the aluminium and the steel. Although being underneath the differential, it's probably going to get soaked in oil anyway. And I may I'll probably put a little bit of foam around that lip as well, just to help seal it and to keep the two metals apart. But that looks pretty good. There should be enough clearance there. And if not, there's enough flex in it that if it ever actually hits it, it'll just bash it out of the way, more or less. But yeah, that under tray is nice and smooth. The petrol tank, I am waiting for the weld through primer, because I'll touch these things up before I weld them, and I probably need to go out and get the tube for the fuel filler. I have re-welded this. It got a little bit lumpy in one place. Again, because I'd been running out of gas, the welds weren't very neat, and there was a bit of muck in the weld, so I had to go back over with a little bit of filler rod, but that'll be fine. It's just annoying when you're doing these kind of things in welding. In your mind, you've got this picture of what the absolute perfect welds should look like, especially if you watch a lot of people on YouTube welding who know what they're doing, and they do absolutely perfect welds every time. And then the reality of it when us amateurs come along is, you know, we can stick two bits of metal together. It's probably not going to leak or fall apart, but it's probably not going to be as pretty as it could be. But that's okay. Like I say, I don't do this day in, day out. I'm pretty sure I could get pretty good at most things if I was doing it day in and day out. Doing everything just every so often, you have to relearn it each time you do it. So, but it's looking good. I might not even bother trying to tidy up the smooth over some of those welds, because where it is, you can't see it. Once it's painted black, it'll be fine. Outside in the shed again, just about to go in. I've made a second instrument panel using a piece of my thicker 2mm aluminium rather than the 1.6 that I used before. 1.6, 1.2, can't remember. I also modified it a little bit to have less of a cutout in the middle here. You just need that to get to the gear lever, but it gives me more instrument panel. So this was a little bit harder to turn up the flange. I didn't film any of this, sorry. I just wanted to come out after work and do something else. So same as I did it on the petrol tank anyway. The good thing about the 2mm is there's a little bit more there to sand smooth to get rid of some of the hammer marks, but I still need to go through and finish it up nicely. It's not too bad at the moment, but you can see there are some marks and things on the edges, but they're okay. You won't see those in the car. And then it'll be a matter of figuring out where I want to make the holes for the gauges, I guess. Probably something like that. Switches down here. I don't know if I want, maybe we'll use that Rotax switch panel. So that could go in there. This has to go here. This is where they went anyway. Yeah, not much to say about that. I have put the towel back on. I was ringing around at lunchtime today, local garages and the local exhaust place, and they didn't have any 3-inch tubing. So I ended up ordering that online. I had to buy a meter off it. I don't need a meter off it, but I only need about that much. This is what I meant about the filler needs to be quite tall so that the spinner will clear the body, because you imagine the body's going to be in here. That's why it's so tall. I probably could have actually made the fuel tank a little bit higher. It's a bit late now. I suppose I could always make another one, but I think that'll be fine. And there's probably, I haven't actually tried this, but it's only a 5 litre container. There is a little bit of room there to fit. You could put another fuel container and just store it in the tail, I guess. Not so convinced they would be safe in an accident, but it would be doable. Yeah, there's not much else to say about that. I may end up putting the front half of the frame on as well, just because I'm sick of tripping over there. I painted the diff cover, you might be able to see it hanging up there, and yeah, until the filler comes, and I'm also waiting for the weld through primer to spray the inside of it, and then I can do the rest of that tank. And I still need to do the fuel lines, which will go from here to that, and then the line that'll go from there to there, and I may just leave that being a piece of hose like that, because I think if I use a hard line I'll have to put loops and things like that in it because of the possible relative twisting of the body to the chassis. So that rubber line is probably fine. You won't see any of that, of course, because it's all hidden in the back of the car. And yeah, I'm looking forward to actually drilling holes in this and getting some instruments mounted. There's no reason why I can't do that now. This is the Rotax switch. It's just such a nice little piece. You know, I'd quite like to be able to use that in there somehow. But, yeah, that was where I got to today. It's the weekend, so I'm back out in the shed. It's kind of a stormy day today, and it's a little bit colder. We were getting up to 35, 36 degrees in here last week, and today it's about 19 or 20, so definitely feels a lot chillier. I've been working on the petrol tank. I'm still waiting for the weld through primer before I can start assembling this, but I did get my exhaust tube. I ended up having to order a meter off it online. Anything like this, exhaust tube or bends or exhaust donuts, anything exhaust related or metal tube related like this, I get through a place called Auto Bend, who are up in Auckland somewhere. But they're really good, they're really fast, and their shipping isn't ridiculous, and they don't have this extra charge for rural, which we are. So I think it costs $7 to get a meter of this pipe delivered, and it took a couple of days. So I've lopped off a length of that. I will need to trim it down. I've also machined a lip on the filler, so that'll fit in there. I went a little bit too far. I did want it to be a nice tight push fit, but unfortunately I screwed it up, so it's a little bit loose, but that's going to be welded on anyway. And I made this ring from 2mm thick steel. It's actually galvanized, but before I weld it I will strip the galvanizing off. That was just a simple ring. I have a hole saw which is almost the right size, so I cut a section out of the middle, and then I was able to put it on the lathe to machine down the outside, and then once the outside was done I was able to grip it by the outside and turn the inside to get it nice and circular. I have then put a curve into it with the slip rollers, and of course when you do this your hole is no longer circular. because you've changed the plane of it. So if you imagine it as you bend the metal, these two sides of the hole get smaller because they move down and in. So I find a flat disc on my electric drill was enough to just open out the sides again so the pipe would fit through. And it's kind of the same with the hole in the tank. Again, I used my hole saw. I can't pull this out, it's quite a tight fit still. And then have been slowly opening it up with the flap disc. I'll need to open it up a little bit further because what I want to do is weld this on the inside just so it's nice and clean on the outside. And then I need to figure out the exact length. This needs to be trimmed down a bit, or this needs to be pushed further in. So this is actually pushed through the ring at the moment, of course, so there's a little bit of that poking through the bottom. I can just push it down until I get to the position I want, and then drill some little vent holes underneath this kind of hat. So even if the tube fits down into the tank, you need little holes around there so that when you're filling it up you don't airlock the rest of the tank. But that's all pretty easy to do. What I will do is plug weld this from the inside because the ends aren't welded in yet, so I can just punch some holes, probably even just MIG weld it, MIG plug weld this ring into place, and then I will go over the whole seam with solder. That's how they originally did the tanks, they were soldered, but that will make it fuel proof, you know, stop any leaks. So that's a pretty good fit. One of my clips has come undone. So that's where we're at with the petrol tank. I may also use a bit of this 2mm steel to make a little plate that I will solder onto here. Again, plug weld from the inside and then solder around the edges to give me something a little bit more thickness to screw in the fuel pickups that'll go through there. And somebody mentioned in the comments an idea which I had anyway, I've mentioned before, about having to block this. So I was going to put a little thing there, and that was using that as a hole to get to a dipstick, basically, so I can tell how much fuel is in the thing. And that would work quite well, I think. I can actually have it screwed into the tank all the time, a piece of brass rod or brass tube, something like that. So when you want to see how much fuel there is, you can just unscrew from the top, lift out the dipstick, put it back in. I'm not sure if brass will work because I need to dip a piece of brass tube or brass bar into some petrol and see if you can see where the level comes up to. I'm not sure that you will. Timber works, definitely wood, so I could use just a wooden dowel in there as well. And there's not much else to say about the petrol tank. Of course, I need to make sure I have it all perpendicular, so everything looks right, and that will fit in there. I've put the frame back on the car. The other thing I need to work out is the straps that hold it. I want to use, where's an example? I don't know what they're called, but it's where you've got the straps come up and around, and there's a bar that goes through the loop in the end, and you've got threaded rods with a bolt going through. It's like what they use on petrol tanks on large trucks, big rig type trucks, so that you can tighten them up. You see them on hose clamps as well. I've got some small ones somewhere. Yeah, I'm not sure where they are. So I need to make up something like that, and I think they will just sort of hook around this. So there'll be a strap here, and then something that joins onto that cross member there, and that will let me strap the tank down, pull it down. Should be possible to remove the body without removing the tank. And I've been playing with the instrument panel, just mocking that up, sitting in the car and making brum brum noises, and it'll be something like that. It's a good thing I mocked it up because I was originally going to have the clock further down, but this clock has a an adjuster shaft that sticks down the bottom. So if I put this lower down, that would stick down here and is going to get bashed by the passengers' knees every time they get in and out of the car. So I'll lift that up a little bit. I'm going to use the Rotax panel because I've got it and it's nice and it's period correct. Not sure it's correct for this car, but it's close enough. And the rest of it should be pretty straightforward. So that panel is much more rigid. So originally it was 1.6 mil, now it's 2 mil thick. It really makes a big difference, just increasing it that little piece. So this is where we're at the moment. I'm going to keep working on this fuel tank. I think what I need to do now is put it back in the car and figure out exactly what height I want here. It's a good thing I tested it. It doesn't need to be any shorter, it's actually about the right length now. So the tape kind of shows where the boot lid's going to go. So you can see why you need such a tall filler neck on the thing. But I think that's going to be about right. So I might actually start welding that up. There's no reason why I can't at the moment. Yeah, I think that looks good. It's worth mentioning you can also get the tank into the car through the opening. The boot opening is just a little bit tricky with the Cleco clips on it because that's adding an extra couple of inches width. But you can do it, although I did knock one off doing that. The other thing worth mentioning is the factory race cars, the long distance cars that they used at ARDS and places like that, had a much bigger tank, but it came past that rear chassis rail. Sort of, it takes up a lot more space in there. Big long distance tanks, but I don't need to carry that much fuel, and I think it might cause problems for the certification if it's sticking outside the chassis. I don't know if they would really consider the body part there structural enough, so I just stuck with something simple that's got enough capacity for me to go anywhere I need to go in it. This is just how I strip the zinc off and the aluminium off the exhaust tube before I can weld it. This is just water with some hydrochloric acid in it. You always add the acid to the water, not the other way around, so it doesn't spit. But it's a pretty weak solution. It's not very strong at all, but it's enough to get the zinc off. You can sort of see it bubbling away there. So once that's removed, you should be able to fit it back into here, and I'm thinking I may try and turn that lip in just a little bit. Just fold it round. One, to leave room for the weld that'll be on the inside of that tube, or the inside of that ring rather, and two, I think it'll just help stiffen that a little bit, although to be honest that's not going to move anyway. Yeah, I'll see. I think I'll weld it first and then see how much I need to relieve this so that it'll actually sit flat. I've TIG brazed the flange to the tube. I brazed it rather than welding it because I find, for me, it's much easier to get a nice joint that I know isn't going to have holes in it or pinholes or leaks. And I'm not going to blow through the metal, so I did have to just fold over the edge there. It's not very neat, but it doesn't need to be. And the way I did that was I just got a piece of steel bar and cut a slot in it, and just hook the slot over the edge of the steel, and you can bend it back, and then a little bit of clean up with our hammer and dolly. But like I say, that doesn't have to be perfect, because that's going to fit in there. I will put some little holes through and then weld that from the inside, and this is where I was talking about having to drill holes in the fuel filler, because I think otherwise if you filled this up and it hits this level, once it hit there, you would be creating a kind of airlock, I guess, if you're trying to put more fuel in. So I'll just put a couple of little holes in there, which let the fuel, let the air out when you're filling it up with fuel. Theoretically, I guess if this is fully sealed, you could fill it all the way up to the top with petrol, but I don't think you ever would. And then that will be soldered. So the welding is what's going to hold it in place, but the soldering will seal it. That's my hope anyway. I may need to do a little bit of hammer and dolly just to get this to sit flat again, because it has warped, because everything warps when you weld it because of the heat. That's the other reason for doing the TIG brazing. It doesn't warp quite as much, but you can see that it has lifted a bit, so I need to just hammer these edges just a little bit so that they'll fit down. And I think what I can do now is I'll do that first so that this sits down in the right place, and then I can figure out at which point I want to weld that on. So I think I'll make it so that when it's fully tightened, it's like that. There will be a gasket in here though, of course, so I may need to either use something rubbery so it'll compress and I can screw that down and get these lined up, or it'll have to be something the exact height or the exact thickness so that when it's done up tight, this is aligned. Not sure how tricky that'll be. I think using a piece of rubber or an O-ring or something like that where you've got some compression on it will be the easiest way. And that, of course, is the baffle in there. It needs a bit of reshaping around the edges and things, although gaps here aren't really going to matter, but I do want it to be touching all the way around if I can. So yeah, a little bit of hammering on this just to get this to sit completely flat. The other thing, what may have happened actually, is as I've folded that edge, I may have pulled it down a little bit. So by that, it's not too bad. But yeah, I'll get these to fit nicely. That will be tinned before I solder it, and I think that should be good. Have that ready to be properly welded and soldered once I get the right primer, and I need to get some solder, I think, but that should be how that sits. When I do the rear supports for the mudguards, I'm actually going to weld a ring to the tube so that it can't get pushed into here, because otherwise, if there's nothing to stop it going through there apart from that bolt, if I get shunted in the side, there's a good chance that that support will go through and puncture the fuel tank. So I will put a collar on the shaft that goes through there, so it can't go in. Hopefully it can't go through and do that. I may actually end up making that bottom one out of something a little bit weaker. It's just a support, so I'll have to have a think about that. I did cut out a rubber gasket, and it worked out to be the exactly perfect width or thickness to be 90 degrees out. So it starts tightening about there and gets nice and tight when this is pointing that way. So I need to reduce the thickness of that or find something more suitable, but that's a little detail to play with. That should look pretty good. I haven't got to the instrument panel. That might be a job for tomorrow. I want to start actually mounting instruments in it, just because I think it would look cool with them actually in place. And the other job I did that I've been meaning to do for literally years now, a couple of years, is fit this bar across the front of the chassis I think it's just extra support, but it's also a convenient place to hang the front number plate. It's actually hollow, it's a tube, and I drilled out and I found some little scraps of silver solder, and I was able to silver solder nuts to the end, and I actually tapped the tube. So these are 3/8 bolts. The reason I put a nut on the end there like that, oh, I just got a splinter in my knee, ouch. The reason I put the nuts on the end is so that you can hold it with a spanner when you're doing up the bolts and the ends. So that's in place. I think that should look pretty good, the fuel filler like that. And as I mentioned, the boot lid needs a hole in it, of course, to go over that. Had to go out today, so I thought I'd pop into Southward's on the way back. Local car museum. I've been here quite a few times, I've filmed it a few times. But it's excellent coming and having a museum almost all to yourself. I think there's one other lot of people here. And I just come up every so often, play spot the difference, because they do move things around. But today I just wanted to get a measurement of the fella set they've got here. Very cool place. If you're in Wellington, it's worth coming to. One of the reasons I like coming here is I get to look at the finish on period cars and try to get an idea of what they actually look like back in the day, because I want to figure out how I'm going to paint the Riley and things like that. This is almost the colour I'm thinking of, this kind of maroony colour, or else that car there might be closer. But I'm just kind of looking at the actual finish of the paint, and it's kind of that sort of finish that I want. I don't want a modern 2-pack finish which looks too deep almost. These are shiny, but they're not. It's not like a deep shine. It's really hard to explain, and the finish isn't perfect on them. So I come here and just have a look at things and get some idea of what the paint should look like. Because the other thing is, I don't think the paint they used back in the day was very good, so it didn't last very long. So I think the cars looked shiny when they came out of the factory, and then a couple of years later they probably looked terrible, and then they repainted them. So for an old car, I don't want it looking like an old car that's just been repainted, even though it will be a new old car that's just been repainted. Also, I've mentioned before, I'm lazy, so I can't be bothered actually doing a lot to look after the paintwork. I'll wash it, but beyond that I don't really do too much. It's another sort of maroon car, but that one's a bit too flat. Yeah, interesting place. I do wonder what I'll do after I've finished the Riley. Obviously I've got my little motorcycle to work on, if I'll do another car or not. And I don't think I want to build another car from scratch. Yeah, it's just getting too tricky. Something that might be interesting would be doing some sort of electric conversion car, because I've got all the skills to do that. I've actually worked for a company that did electric car stuff back in the day, mid-90s in the UK. Bit ahead of their time, I think they were, but the battery technology wasn't really there. So an electric sort of car would be interesting, I guess, just as an engineering exercise. Or else I think I would restore an existing car, and something that's fairly easy, like a Mini. I've never actually driven a Mini. I suppose I should at some point. But of course then there's the Riley version of the Mini, the Elf, which I think, as Joss used to put it, was basically a Mini in a frock. So different front, different rear end with a boot, but basically the same sort of thing. The problem is even old cars are getting expensive now. So there's a Riley Elf on Trade Me that looks like a good project, but I think they want sort of $5 grand for it. It's a bit too much. So I don't know, maybe Trade Me isn't the right place to look, but the days of really cheap project cars seems to be a bit behind us, and it's just getting so expensive for the parts now, especially when you have to import them all from the UK. So somebody did point out in one of the comments a chap who recalibrated speedos, but that was for magnetic speedos, not the chronometric like I'm using, where I think the only way you can change them is redo the gearing or have a little pre-gauge input gearbox to change the ratio. But the guy doing that, his channel, he's got a thing about restoring an Anglia. I think it's 100E, but I can't remember what year his is. I don't know much about them. Similar to this. So I'm watching those at the moment. It's quite interesting. I think his films are a bit like mine, where he's just kind of filming what he's doing. He's not necessarily doing it for any other reason. I find those sort of films a bit more interesting, and I find the ones about these sort of old normal cars far more interesting than, say, the supercar building ones. So, or there's lots of American ones where they're doing engine swaps and things like that, and it just gets annoying and frustrating because it's so easy for them. I don't want to say it's easy to do, but you know, they can order parts overnight. There's, for any of those big V8 engines, you can get as many parts as you want for pretty good money. I mean, they're not that expensive over there. But if you're on this side of the world trying to restore a weird little British car, it just gets really expensive really quickly. But, this is the downstairs bit of Southwards, where there's a few more modern British cars and things. Speaking of electric cars, this is an Austin Allegro. There is a channel I watch where a guy in New Zealand is electrifying one of these with Nissan Leaf running gear motor and so on. A very strange car, these, I think. Even the badge on it looks like something out of a 70s or 80s British kids comic book. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes, but I think his limiting thing seems to be funds as well, so he doesn't do a lot very quickly. Another car with a similar colour and the sort of paint finish I'm thinking. It's definitely shiny. Seems to be a Buick. 4.1 litre inline 8-cylinder. Don't know anything about big American cars really. It's not kind of my thing. But, the colour's close, but not quite right. Maybe this is getting a bit closer. Not really sure. This is a lot flatter sort of finish. I'm not quite sure about the colour. This one's quite red. I'm not sure how the camera changes the colours either. Of course there'll be some difference there. Now this one, it's a Ford V8. Not the right colour of course, but definitely more the sort of finish. It's not a matte finish. Kind of semi-glossy, I guess. I don't know. And again, I don't know how well the camera picks it up, but it's not overly shiny. I think one of the things with the modern paints is because you've got a clear over it, you get that glassy look, which I don't think is right for what I want to do. Whereas this is kind of, it's got some shine to it, but it's not like a mirror shine. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know what they call that. It's to do with the level of gloss or the level of matte in the paint, I guess. So some of these start looking a little bit too glossy. the only way I can describe it is it's like the colour is underneath that layer of clear. I don't like that look for an old car. So the paint can be shiny, but it needs to be the paint that's shiny, not just the clear coat, I guess. So this one's a Riley. This is a 1936 Merlin Riley 9, so very similar to what I'm building. Some of the running gear will be probably exactly the same. I'm assuming this is an original Riley colour. It's sort of the colour I'm thinking, but still, again, not quite right. But, yeah, I'll have to look up what the original Riley colours were. Something like that. I think this is a good example of where the paint's shiny, but I don't know if this would be clear coated, if it's been repainted or not. It's very hard to tell. I have got a couple of modern cars over there. I'll have a look at those when I get round there. Again, this is sort of the colour. This is a very matte finish on this one. But I actually quite like it. You're not worried about it being shiny. And I think this is what happened to the paint over time. It started off really shiny and then just dulled down like this. Could do a more matty type finish, I suppose. But I do want the sort of black chassis and running gear and the coloured body. So I want to actually be able to see the chassis rail down the bottom, so I want that black. So I think, yeah, the Riley has black running gear. I'm not doing a full tour around here, lots of other people have done that before, so if you search you can find lots of YouTube videos about this place. Again, this is kind of dull finish. I'm imagining that's probably pretty original paint on this. It's a Gwyn G10 apparently. You can see the sort of stickers on it which look like they've been there for a while. You can see how the paint has faded and dulled down, chipped on the edges. A little Ugandan. Every time I come here I see something that I'm sure I've seen hundreds of times before, but actually notice. But as I say, they also do move things around, so that one might be... was that here before? I'd have to make my own films and check, see what's different every time I come back. The American Bantam I've definitely seen before, because that's basically an Austin 7 with American styling, which kind of makes it almost look like a little clown car. There's the little Austin Swallow. Again, I like how the paint looks on it. This one looks like somebody might have hand painted it or something though. But compared, say, to this Alpha, which I know they restored here, and the paint just looks too modern. It looks too plastic, almost. It needs to be driven around a bit in stones and grit and dirty weather and get a bit of wear to it. This is it a Mulu, I think they called them? It's like a HSV Ute thing. Oh yeah, Malu? Not sure. Again, not really my sort of thing. bubble cars. There's some more modern cars here. I think you can see the difference almost between this one, which is a Corvette, 1969 apparently, and the Lotus, the Turbo Esprit. So I don't know how to describe it. You can see it even more on this McLaren. Obviously there's no paint on the DeLorean. The way I can describe it is it looks like you could peel off the clear layer. It looks separate to the paint to me. That's the only way I could kind of explain it. Whereas if it's just straight paint and it's shiny, it looks like one solid layer. Whereas the modern paints always look to me like you can tell there's a layer of clear over it. So it kind of makes it look like it's got plastic film over it maybe. A lot of the time I think they actually do have plastic film over them these days with the paint protection stuff. But yeah, I don't think I'm explaining it very well. I think this car is good. So this is a replica, I think. Yeah, GT40 replica. But the paint on this is shiny without looking plasticky. It's kind of a bit plasticky, but yeah. Whereas that McLaren looks like it's covered in a clear layer, which it is. Yeah, I'm really not explaining this well at all, but hopefully people know what I mean. I know the kind of look I want to get. I just don't know how to get it. Cadillac. Oh, these huge 770k German things. Fairly popular with Nazis as staff cars, I think. Big, huge thing. Yeah, really big. Early Sunday morning is a very good time to come here because it's empty. There's a Landy. I seem to have fixed the leaks in the sunroofs, which is good. We've had some rain recently and it hasn't seemed to let any water in, which is excellent. So during summer, this is where they have the sort of coffee and cars event. I think it's the second Sunday of the month, so next week, and this place will be packed. So maybe I'll come back then and film a little bit more then. The only other people who were here have just left. It was actually making filming difficult. There were only two of them and they were walking around together, but they were yelling at each other. I don't know why people feel the need to do that. So I had to be careful when I was trying to film. So I could go back in now, I'd be the only person here. But I've seen what I need to see for the day. So it'll be time to head home soon. Via the tip shop, I think. Might go pop in there and see if they've got anything interesting.